Hi, kitty cats. The topic today, how scientists use the terms sex and gender and why politicians can't seem to get it right. Because this affects not just the LGBTQ community, but all of humanity. We need to do it better. All right. Well, I am Amethysta, an author and podcaster. You can check the links below for more information about me and the work that I do. That first link is my personal website, amethysta.io, where you will find all of my social media networks. And hopefully you'll follow me and check out all the updates that I do. The second link down is my professional website. That's genderidentitytoday.com. All of my articles, all of my podcasts, my live streams, these are all published there, as well as work actually from other contributors. So if you like this content, I hope you will consider subscribing at genderidentitytoday.com. You can get a subscription for as low as $2 a month. And if you would like to contribute content to Gender Identity Today, please contact me with, again, the first link, which is my personal one. There's a contact link, and I would love to publish you. That last link, finally, is a link to coffee. So if you'd like to leave a tip, then you can do that as you see fit. All right, the topic today, move my mic just a little bit. The topic today is sex and gender. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because I am a scientist. I am not a politician. My background has been biology since I was very young, especially genetics. I actually went on to complete a Ph.D. in analytical chemistry. So as a result, as a scientist, I'm very interested in seeing science represented properly. But to go a little bit more deeply, I am also transgender. And although I have completed both my social and my medical transition, and you might say, well, nobody can touch me now, there are politicians creating legislation daily. And these people are seeking to limit expression of who we are. Not just me. If you start with gender expression, it's going to go further. There's a danger to all of us that we have to address. Now, I have thoughts on why this happens, and I'm going to save those for later. But regarding sex and gender, I've actually presented on this topic several times, both privately and publicly. I have a video that I've linked in the show notes. This is on YouTube. The video is on YouTube. That is more in-depth and more philosophical than what I'm going to do in a live stream. But I also wanted a shorter and more pointed version. My friend Morgan, if you're out there, hi Morgan. My friend Morgan recommended this, and I thought it was a great idea, so that's why I'm doing it. I'm going to jump right into this. What is sex? It turns out that there is a clear definition for sex. If you look at early biologists, we don't have to go back too many years here, but early biologists started to observe how species reproduce. And at the very least, they noticed two very broad categories. When you observe species all the way across nature, from plants, fungi, animals, all of this, they noticed that there were two broad categories first. The categories had to do with either one organism necessary to reproduce, which was called asexual reproduction, or more than one organism necessary to reproduce, which was called sexual reproduction. Now I'm going to limit my discussion now to sexual reproduction because, of course, that's where the definition of sex even comes in. So early biologists, in observing nature, needed to create a term that grouped the function that an organism would play in reproduction. If it takes more than one organism to reproduce, what functions do these organisms play? Now again, this term has to cover all species in nature. Humans are actually not the only species in nature. And like any definition of science, it has a limited and a targeted utility, because this is science. This is what science does. Science defines things clearly and crisply. So we needed a term that was designed to describe a species as a whole. And it had to describe how the species engages in sexual reproduction. the way a species engages in reproduction is done through a type of cell called a gamete. And the quick way of describing this, it's a package of genetic material. And ultimately, these two packages come together, they combine, the genetics make a new organism, and hoocha, that's sexual reproduction. It's magical, truly. Now, in nature, biologists In nature, biologists have observed that most species only produce two gametes, and they are distinguishable primarily by size. If you have a small one, there are gametes that are of relatively small size and able to move, which is motile is the word for that, and we define those to be called sperm. And if you look at gametes that are relatively large, and I'm talking relationship here of orders of magnitude. So an ovum, which is the relatively large and stationary gamete, is usually on the order of 3 orders of magnitude larger than the sperm. Now I'm going to tell you this is not universal. There are a handful of species out there that actually produce more than 2 gametes, but I'm going to limit my discussion here to looking at species that do produce only 2 gametes. The definition of sex for biologists is a grouping that's based on what gamete is produced and contributed to reproduction. The definition of male is an organism that produces sperm and contributes it to reproduction. The definition of female is an organism that produces ova and contributes them to reproduction. That's it. There are no other characteristics specified in the definition of sex. Hi, Allison Goodman. Sex, the definition of sex does not refer to genetics. The definition of sex does not refer to the physical nature of the species. The definition of sex does not refer to the parts that are used to produce the gametes or deliver the gametes or do something with the gametes. It doesn't refer to the parts. And sex does not refer to the behavior exhibited prior to or during reproduction. Now you may think, that's not very useful, is it? But there is a reason for being this vague. And the reason is that across all of nature, there are species that differ in how they produce gametes. Each individual within a species differs in its genetics and its behavior. Oh, thank you for the rose, Allison. There are also species that are born being able to produce either gametes. So what do you call those? If sex is a grouping, there are also species born that when they're born cannot even contribute to sexual reproduction immediately. Mammals are a great example of this, which includes humans. So at the end of the day, sex as a definition is a species-level abstraction. Nothing more. And so maybe you're right now throwing your hands up and going, thanks, biology. That really didn't help us much. What if we want to discuss individual-level genetics? What if we want to discuss behavior? What if we want to discuss social interaction? Well, guess what? Biology didn't just give up, but it did have to define a new term. And I'm going to cut to the chase. That term is gender. Sex and gender have actual definitions, crisp definitions. So let's talk about gender. I want to draw out first the major difference between these two definitions. Sex, as I just said, the definition of sex is limited to describing the categories within a species. But gender is a definition limited to describing the individuals observed in nature. And the thing is that biology needs these two terms. You can't get by with only one term. You need to be able to describe both the possibilities in biology and the realities that we observe. And so gender, the definition of gender, is an individual level implementation of sex characteristics. And this is used to distinguish the capability of reproducing as well as the role played in reproduction. So let me take a quick step back there because that was a lot of information. Sex defines groupings. What type of gametes can be produced by this organism? Gender describes the capability of reproducing and the role played in an act of reproduction. Those are very different terms. So you would think, well, why can't we just say male and female? The thing is that the words aren't descriptive enough. Even if we left out behavior, even if we left out a lot of things, many species vary during life. I just referred to mammals. We need time to reach sexual maturity. When mammals are born, when babies are born, they cannot produce gametes and contribute to sexual reproduction. It's a limitation of our species. There are also species, fish, there are fish in the Great Barrier Reef that are great examples of this. There are species that will change the gamete they produce. They will change their sex based on social pressures, depending upon how many people, how many organisms are in the society. And then you have some species that actually produce both gametes and they fertilize themselves. You see this a lot in flowers, some of the plants. Now again, we use these words across all of nature. The terms for male and female are universal across nature. But when you look at individual species, we have slightly different words. With humans, we use the words man and woman. But if you look at, say, deer, we distinguish between a stag and a doe. And that's different from male or female because we also distinguish fawns, which are baby deer. It can get even more complicated if you look at bovines. There are bulls, which are mature males, actually capable of engaging in reproduction, or you could have steers, which are castrated bulls, incapable of engaging in reproduction. There are also heifers. These are cows that presumably are virgins. They have not calved yet. They have not given birth to a calf. Cows. These are sexually mature female bovines who have given birth to at least one calf. And then, I've used the word twice already, there are calves to describe bovines that are young. These are 5 terms to describe bovines. If we thought that this was a simple description that you can just bring it down to one word, we're being silly, because gender represents the diversity in life. Gender represents each of our individual genetics. And then if you look at humans, our individual cognition, our thoughts, our emotion, these are not the things that are described by sex. It also describes our individual behavior, our motivations, our desires, what we want, what we like to be. And it also describes the individual situation each of us has within our social environment. One term alone cannot capture all that. Sex is not enough. Sex is a blunt instrument that, in biology, frankly, was never designed to capture it all. The function that an organism can play in reproduction is a very poor description of both nature and life as a whole. So I mentioned I was going to distinguish sex and gender, but I also wanted to talk about why these terms have been misused. So let's go on to that. When I was just talking about species, I mentioned some fish, I mentioned bovines, and I've had people jump on me right there and go, ah, bah, 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 bah. I am not a fish. Good point. You are not a fish. Humans are actually not the same as many other species in nature. And guess what? I recognize that. In fact, humans are somewhat unique. We're unique in our mundanity, in the lack of change that we can make throughout our lives. We are relatively static in sex and gender. Yes, it does take us a while to reach sexual maturity, but humans don't typically change much once we've reached sexual maturity in our individual ability to engage in reproduction. And humans, for the most part, biology is not typically greatly affected by social pressures. But humans are still part of nature. You can't just pull that out and say, even though we have clear terms defined by biology, that we can just usurp those terms, redefine them to apply only to humans. But this is what we do. If you listen to our politicians want to say that male is man, female is woman, and it is an attempt to conflate the capability of sex with the role played in the act of sex. Because I will point out again, infant humans are not capable of engaging in sex. Hi, Sherry. The behavior of humans defines the role. We have homosexual relationships that don't result in offspring, and there are many different methods of sexual stimulation. I could name a few, but that's not the purpose of this particular live stream. Humans may want to redefine the terms that biology has defined because it would be politically expedient. But, as a scientist, unfortunately, I'm going to have to tell you, that's not how science works. There's a lot within a social environment that you get common usage of language, that even though we may have politicians who are going to attempt to redefine terms, common usage of language is certainly not the same as scientific accuracy. Does this matter? Oh, hell yes. Absolutely. This is why these terms are misused. When you want to equate a function of biology with a role in an individual's life, that's politics. Ladies and gentlemen, and NBs, this is not science. Now, I won't claim that this is not politically unimportant. I recognize some of these distinctions may play into personal safety. And I don't think I have to point out too much that there are cultural norms that, of course, value one gender over the other. There are religions that will claim that humans with a penis are morally superior. There are industries that claim humans with a penis are better leaders. There are political platforms that will claim humans with a penis should run all of society. This is important, and that's why it's important that we get this right. Now I'm going to tell you, now that I've gone this far, 19 minutes into this, unfortunately I don't have the answers to solve the problems when politics starts. But it begins with education. So it begins with this understanding science. Now you might ask the question, well, where did science go astray then? Why did science, how is it that these terms have been conflated and then usurped and then screwed up? I think if we go back to the birth of science, here's where I'm going to get into opinion, by the way. I was giving you scientific fact, just giving you some definitions, fun definitions, but now I'm going to give you a little bit of my opinion. I believe if we go back to the birth of science as we know it in quotation marks, if we look at the Renaissance, the Age of Reason, even though it was the Age of Reason, reason was still very, very heavily influenced by the medieval era. We were coming out of a time, I'm saying we, scientists, apparently I was there. Scientists were coming out of a time when heresy, when speaking against the Catholic Church, would get you burned at the stake. There was a matter of personal safety in being a scientist. If you discovered too much, you might end up being accused of heresy. We can look at Copernicus, we can look at Galileo. And this practice left a very deep, very long-lasting scar on the practice of science. How deep, how long-lasting? I think this affects science and scientists to the present day. Even though the United States, I mean, it's not in any actual formal political document. Even though the United States claims a separation of church and state, religion and government are very closely tied. And as Alison Goodman mentions, the Vatican holds the world's secrets and continues to be the dictator of the world. And I'm not going to debate that. Much of the science that I was in, anyway, was funded by the government. When I was in academia, all of my work was either funded by Office of Naval Research or, I'm forgetting, but funded by the government. And if the religion is tied into the government, this is how deep and long-lasting this scar has lasted. So there was an article that I read recently, and I'm going to call out a friend of mine who's presumably not watching, but her name is Lilith Hellstrom. I have, in the show notes, I've linked to a Medium article that she published. She has a translation from the Bible. So it's a biblical quote. It's Genesis 1:27. And the translation that she quotes contains the words male and female. Now I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm also going to say I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I have no desire to be a Hebrew scholar, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I doubt Moses intended to use a scientific term. And I bring this up because what Lilith quoted is a translation. A translation uses language, and that particular translation uses terms defined by science. This is an example now of how language is being used to justify science. You have a scripture here. You know, there are religious people out there who are going to say, well, look, it says right here, God created male and female. That's why science observes male and female. And it allows for science then to be used to justify religion. If you point to that quote, you can go, see, or a scientific religion. It's right there in the scripture. Now I believe, as a scientist, because if I didn't believe this, maybe I'd need to consider, what I was doing with my life. But I believe that science has not gone astray. Science as a practice is still alive and well, but we are looking at scientific terms, the words sex and gender being used for political power. Nothing more. I say nothing more, but it's pretty dang important. We must combat this, because if we don't combat this, it leads to laws, and it leads to conflict. It leads to war. I know that sounds maybe hysterical. I'm not kidding. And I hope that after watching this particular presentation, you will join me in combating misuse of these terms through education. If you would, please point people to me. Point them to my work. Support me in my work. Please like and subscribe. And if you're really going to go nuts, subscribe at genderidentitytoday.com, the second URL below, or leave me a tip. But I believe very strongly we can combat this because science ends up not lying. That's the way it works. I don't really care what kind of language you want to use. All right, with that, it's 24 past the hour. So I have 6 minutes. If anybody has a comment that they want to make, I am more than happy to address them because I love to talk about this. This is what I do. Thank you, Sherry. Beautifully said. There are reasons, by the way, I just want to, because if I don't have a question, I'm just going to, prattle for 6 minutes. There is a reason. Thank you, Allison. I appreciate that. There is a reason why I'm so emphatic about this. I can certainly say that I have a personal investment in this. that I have a personal investment because I am transgender, and I'm concerned about laws that are going to be made that ultimately outlaw me, cause me to have to find another place to live. There's no doubt I'm concerned about that. But I'm much more concerned about the idea that identity could become a political weapon. And I'm not going to say that this has not happened across human history, because absolutely it has. In fact, just as a brief interlude, it used to be that humans who were either sexually fluid or fluid in their gender were powerful. We were revered. We were considered the oracles. We were considered the healers. We were also considered the people who conveyed authority. There was a story that I was told. I didn't read this personally, but there is a story that Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great, when he went into Jerusalem, went not very far outside of Jerusalem to visit a community of people, sexually and gender fluid, who conveyed the authority of king upon him. They conveyed sovereignty. They granted sovereignty. This is a big thing. I mean, it used to be that the people who were fluid were powerful. And I'm not concerned about having lost that power. I am, however, concerned about losing the ability to distinguish, to say that they don't exist, that different sexualities, different genders don't exist. So Allison asks, do I think the uprise of Christianity is what caused this? I think, and she also asks, is it hatred? And actually, yeah, Sherry also mentions that Native Americans are one of the cultures who revere the others. Celtic culture was another, and obviously ancient Jewish culture that I just pointed out. So is it only Christianity? I don't believe so. I'd love to point a finger and just say it's those dang Christians, but I'm not going to. I don't think we can. Hi, it's ramen tacos. I don't think we can say that, because we're looking at language, and there's a big point that the gender. You will hear many people say this: the gender is purely a social construct. I don't truly believe that, and actually the presentation that I linked in the show notes here goes through my own original theory of gender, that we have biology and we have society, but we also have our individual cognition and behavior that is needed to mediate among all these. So was it just Christianity? No, because I believe that I don't know if I want to say my community, but I believe that language ends up, because it can evolve, we end up dropping the importance of science. Because, I mean, if you want to look at, I have another example in that presentation regarding colors. And I talk about the difference between red and blue. I mean, of course, I'm not going to have red or blue things here, but if we were to hold up an apple and say, this is a red apple, scientifically that's inaccurate. Like, all of us know, yeah, that's a red apple, sure. But scientifically, red is actually a range of wavelengths that is reflected from the apple into our eyes. And red is only important because human organs, or human organs of sight, actually respond to those wavelengths. Has nothing to do with the apple. It really has nothing to do with the universe as a whole. It's purely a human characteristic. And so my point here is that we hold up an apple and we say this is a red apple, and red apples, are very important in a lot of cultures, but technically the apple's not red. So again, common language constructs that don't match scientific verbiage, scientific definitions. And I was thinking, Morgan actually also gave me this idea. I was thinking about doing a a live stream next week, because that isn't to say that I think language is unimportant, because I think language is critical. I really think that language is critical because language also plays into pronouns. Language plays into a lot of things, including red apples. So, okay. I now have 1:30 p.m. on the clock here. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined, everybody who's going to watch this after the fact. Again, my name is Amethysta Herrick. This live stream was Identify Yourself. And if you want more information, please go down to those links below my head here. Thank you so much. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye.